Good morning, Parimal sir. Whenever you indicate, I would like to start my session. If you can just give me one small comment down, either you or Preeti madam, that would be a signal for me. I am ready from my side. Good morning, everybody. Right at the outset, let me express my sincere thanks to MIT School of Government for providing me this wonderful opportunity to conduct a Facebook live session for all of you. During this corona affected days, rather than meeting in person, we are having some technical conferences like this. In the initial stages today, I had some technical issues, but now those have been sorted out. And with your kind permission, I would like to start with my session as such. The topic which has been given for me today is the share market in pandemics, historical lessons for the current crisis. Right at the outset, let me tell you that these are my personal views and it has nothing to do with the position or the organization which I represent. Certainly, I will be conducting my session based on my experiences which I had as I have been associated with financial services field of our country for last more than 40 years. Out of those, for last 33 years or so, I have been associated with and analyzing a central government budget for 33 consecutive years. Certainly, I will be carrying out and drawing out more heavily from these experiences which I had so far. But certainly, these are my personal views or interpretation thereof. To be honest, what we are facing today is quite unique. Because although the title of the day or the topic for the day starts with a share market in pandemics, to be honest, as far as Indian capital market or Indian share market is concerned, this may be probably a first ever pandemics in the real sense which they are facing. It is not that our country was immune to earlier pandemics as such, but at least whether it was 1905 plague or any other thereafter, or a natural calamity in the nature of a floods or famines. But certainly the capital market as such and economic activity in particular was never a central corner piece of a thinking mind of a common man like you and I, as it has been today. And as and when I do see the word history, I am always reminded of a saying by Mark Twain. It is said that Mark Twain has said somewhere that history not only repeats, but it rhymes. But my experience so far of this finance field is concerned, it says that it is the first part probably of a sentence, and second part which Mark Twain has not said, but probably the circumstances have taught us is that history does not only repeat, but it rhymes itself. At the same time, history never says goodbye. It only says, let us meet again as and when time permits. Probably this is the time when we are thinking thereof. Although we are talking about a pandemic and its impact and a historical lesson per se, one has to note that as of date, just before when we started our session, the BSE Sensex was quoting as 31,764, up by almost 200 points. Before that, on a closing working day, it has gone up by almost 960 points. So especially between March and April, it has shown some sort of an reason. Does it mean that it has not yet been affected? Probably the reason is not like that. And that's why, although I'm going to analyze the current scenario, I would like to co-tingle them or mix-tingle them with the historics what it has been done. Our market might not have shown or experienced those kinds of pandemics as far as its active life and its active perception between you and I is concerned. But our market has seen many of the things, basically the cross-current and the cross-country stock market stories, point number one. Point number two, we have learned and experienced many financial pandemics rather than the medical pandemics in last 30 years or so, since when the process of economic reforms in our country has initiated. If we look at the current composition of a market, the first ever historical lesson which we need to learn is that whether it is during World War I or World War II, and during that particular phase, to some extent, there was a market or exchange in existence in our country. Because history tells us that the first ever the stock exchange, not only of our country, but Asia as a region, was established in 1857 in the nature of a Native Stockbrokers Association, which in today's era we called it as Bombay Stock Exchange or a BSE. During those phases, although the world was equity, it was dominated more by the government securities and to a very limited extent corporate bond, and even lesser than corporate bond by the equity market or a share market. And as the world will go, during such kind of a scenario, the interest-bearing instruments do undergo a change. If we have to draw a simile therefrom, because even in today's era, we can see that not only after the outburst of Corona, but even for last 30 years or so, the conscious effort has been made by the policymakers. I'm purposely using the word policymaker because I want to distinguish them from the present rulers or the rulers of that particular day. Because for last 30 years or so, our economic policy has never taken an U-turn thereof. And that's why I use the word policymaker. These policymakers for last 30 years or so have constantly and consciously made the efforts to reduce the rate of interest. And that particular activity is carried on even today. So this is one kind of a historical lesson. Another lesson which can be drawn therefrom is that as and when, not as a knee-jerk reaction, but as a part and parcel of a continuous thing, if the interest rates are getting reduced, the policymakers do intend to give a signal to a common investor like you and I that one has to strategize and one has to prioritize, and most importantly, one has to classify its entire investments, not only based on the pocket size of the investment, but the priority and the intention behind it. Because one thing is very clear, that if economy has to go up, there are certain reasons which need to be looked into. Although the title of the day does include a word history, I am afraid that whenever we talk about a history, it is looking towards the past. But a market is more interested in looking at future, discounting the present there itself. Or other way around, discounting the present in present context as well. And that's why whenever I'm using this particular word, and although speaking in English, I am reminded of one couplet a Marathi poet Vinda Karandikar has said. Vinda Karandikar in his poem has said, इतिहासाचे अवजड ओझे डोक्यावर घेऊन नानाचा, करा पदस्थल त्याचे आणिक त्यावर चढुनी भविष्य वाचा. To translate it roughly and broadly, if one has to say that it is certainly not the burden of a history which we need to carry, but we can use a history as a stepping stone to look not only at the present, but also at the future. And whatever time limit has been already stated as far as this Facebook live session is concerned, which may last up to 25 to 30 minutes, I'm going to do exactly the same. As all of us have said, I have to bring one particular factor which is not historical in nature, but one thing is certainly there, that each and every pandemic, whether it is political in nature, whether it is medical in nature, whether it is financial in nature, has brought forward the new superheroes in a global market as well as in a local market. And this is probably going to happen, point number one. Point number two, the history has already told us time and again that not men and not the machine as a policy which is needed or mattered. As Charlie Chaplin has said in his one of the famous film, Great Dictator, the last monologue, which lasts up to 17 minutes and 24 seconds per se, he over there has said that although machine does the job, machine doesn't matter. What matters is the man behind the machine which matters. Probably if we replace the word machine by the word history, or if we replace the word machine by the word policy, probably that can be extrapolated to the situation which we are having over here today. Let us have a look at a current scenario. Because one thing is very certain, any pandemic, whatever may be its color and content or contour may be, certainly the tightening of a policy does take place. It certainly tries to rely more on a domestic market, not only for the product, but also for the money. And most importantly, the historical lesson which we are trying to draw here from is that every pandemic, whatever may be its color, has already told us and taught us that certainly the policymaker starts looking inward rather than the outward. Let us have a look at what lesson we have to learn as far as the current announcements in this regard are concerned. I would like to draw your attention to one particular thing. Although in today's days or a period when it is harder to get a physical newspaper at hand at our doorstep, and my generation, I will be completing 60 in next few weeks, my generation is more comfortable and convinced when I read a newspaper rather than an e-paper. Because it is very difficult to decipher the news which are given on media. I'm not skeptical about them, but probably their political colors are predominantly there rather than the actual fact which is being mentioned. But it has been heard for last 2 or 3 days that not a compulsion but some sort of an advisory has been issued that henceforth we will have to be careful as a country or a national economy as regards a foreign direct investment is concerned. Certainly, it is in order to protect the financial interest of our national economy. Certainly, the intentions thereof cannot be counted. Neither it is counted nor it is questioned. But it needs to be deciphered in the today's context as far as my market when it is quoting as 31,700 plus minus is concerned. It has two connotations. Right at the outset, one has to keep in mind that in today's era, my economy or our national economy is not in an isolation. It is not on the borderlines of a global crisis. It is not on the borderlines of a global financial scenario. We may not be at the center, but we are not far off from the center as well. It is not only that our economy is dependent on others, it is equally true that many more other foreign countries are mentioned or be dependent on our country as well. If as a national economy policy maker our country is going to say that we henceforth will be much more careful, I am very careful in using the word careful. You can open and interpret a word careful in the way in which you want. But if we as a policymaker or a national economy wants to be careful as far as the inflow of a foreign direct investment is concerned, one has to take into consideration the extent of NRI remittances which our country receives. Because very recently, or till the recent past, we as a nation have always encouraged consistently to receive much more foreign direct investment. The laudatory references thereof have been found time and again in many budget speeches since 1991, and probably most importantly and most prominently in last 7 to 8 years. It is certainly the result of the consistent effort of the last 30 years per se. Under such circumstances, if we are going to say that this particular thing I am going to restrict or I am going to screen out, certainly the country which is passing on the funds to us, including my NRI remittances, may receive a similar treatment. Under such circumstances, my rupee conversion parity with others may get affected and affected as well. Purposely, I am using both the verbs affected and affected because a consistent effort or a conscious effort has been made in last few years where we want to activate our government security market as well as a corporate debt market, which provides the liquidity lines itself. Whether it's a lifeline or not, I leave it to you as far as my equity market is concerned. Because the extent to which my equity market is vibrant or receiving some volumes, my government security market and my corporate debt market do see the volume, but they are sporadic in nature. Point number one. And this is the first historical lesson that these particular markets get affected as a post effect as far as any pandemic is concerned. Even today, my situation, even in a normal circumstance, do remain like that. If you look at the players which are involved, then certainly the first restriction or a consideration, if not a restriction as of now, that I will be henceforth more screeningful or careful as far as my foreign investments or foreign flows are concerned, it would have this kind of a scenario. Per se, it will affect only the government security market or a corporate debt or a bond market. But to be honest, these are the areas under the circumstances where we are going to say that this will be the area where my surplus funds with the mutual funds are being parked. If those areas or those avenues or those sources get limited to the extent of volatility as far as my equity market is concerned would get affected to a great extent. Because as of now, in any government security market or a corporate debt market, while making the purchases, because of the existing rules, right at the outset, I have to mark, especially in case of government security, whether I am buying it for trading, whether I am buying it for investment, or I am buying it for a maturity. Such kind of a bifurcation is not available as far as the equity market is concerned. So the entire portfolio may get commingled as far as the markets are concerned. The equity market may receive a trading volume thereof, but a sudden spurt of a trading volume in a particular scenario, the historical lesson has told us that it is some sort of opening a Pandora's box. I may sound skeptical, although my surname doesn't allow me to say so, but let me be very honest that it is not skeptical, but at the same time it needs to be prescribed thereinto. The second scenario which needs to be understood over here, that per se government likes to have increased the liquidity as far as the market is concerned, a historical lesson learned out of any pandemics. But at the same time, when it comes to own government purses per se, they want to direct a flow to a particular level. I would like to give a recent simile there too. Very recently, the prominent private sector bank, that is HDFC Bank, has announced its quarterly results and along with that their annual results. As far as their quarterly income is concerned, it has shown a rise or an increase compared to the last corresponding quarter of the last financial year. But even then, they have refrained themselves from declaring any final dividend for the current year. That particular organization is on record saying that they have provided much more for the probabilities. I am not using the word NPA, but that is understood. At the same time, they are following a suggestion made by Reserve Bank of India. The word suggestion is quite indicative. It is not a directive. But if Reserve Bank has issued such a directive or a suggestion, certainly it is not restricted only to a private sector bank. It will be included or inclusive to the private sector as well as the public sector banks and probably to the cooperative banks, subject to the respective state government issuing such kind of a notification as well. Considering the equity composition of our public sector banks, where as of date, Central Government of India, in the name of President of India, is a major stakeholder, under such circumstances, it makes sense in one hand to continue and construe that withholding of dividend would park the funds with the same institute, which can be used for effecting the liquidity thereof has been changed. Point number one. Point number two, it needs to be understood that it cannot be restricted. If this is going to be a stance, if not a policy or a directive, it is not going to be restrictive only for the banking sector. There is a huge class of investors, even the common man investor like you and I, who do feel that basically we do need to understand that comparatively the portfolio investment and portfolio managers and some of us do bifurcate our equity investments into two purposes, into the two portions or pockets. First represents certainly the investment for a capital appreciation, which consists of equities in the nature of markets or the shares which have the potential to give you a difference between a rate of buying and a rate of selling over a period of time. There are certain set of securities which do move in a particular bandwidth as far as the market is concerned. And those securities even then are darlings of the investors because they do keep on giving a huge or a good dividend, and including the interim one as well. Under such circumstances, such scripts, if they are in a public sector companies, would get affected by this kind of a suggestion. We have seen these examples in a recent past. On 1st of February 2020, when the budget was declared, the finance minister has announced that from the financial year 2021, the dividend distribution tax henceforth will be taxable at the hand of an investor. Till then, that is from 1st of April, it has already been implemented. Till before that, the dividend used to get taxed at the hands of corporates. And that's why we have seen that central government being a major stakeholder in companies like NHPC, NTPC, ONGC, Container Corporation of India, Coal India, Rural Electricity Corporation Limited, RECL, IRCTC, and certain defense stock as well, that they declared a huge dividend because government was going to be a beneficiary thereof. It is a nice way of buffeting a government resources without taxing a common man, especially when the GST is under stress, considering the lockdown and other stoppages of economic activities, whether these kinds of TICTs would go up, because this is one of a historical lesson that when government becomes choosy as far as their income allocation and resource allocation is concerned, that creates a huge problem. It is not that I am sounding skeptical, but when we use the word lessons, they really start with a negative punishment kind of a scenario. But what I like to say most is that there are instances that national economies have really risen from the phoenix like that. It not necessarily be only a medical pandemics as we are facing in the days of COVID-19 or Corona, whether it is a war, whether it is a flood, whether it is a famine. If you are able to realign your economy post thereof, sooner you are able to realign your policy, sooner you are able to realign your product, sooner you are able to realign your services, certainly those economies would go up, and there are instances where they have gone. We are aware of a Japanese miracle. We are aware of German miracle during the period of between the First World War and the Second World War. We have seen how America has grown up. Probably there is a ray of hope even this kind of a scenario. Considering that 58% of my national GDP comes from services, and sine qua non of my services industry is that if it takes no time to go down, it equally takes very less time to go up, kind of number one. Number two, even within these 58% of my GDP, if you do start a sectoral analysis thereof, this today's generation of economic reforms, in these today's generations of service professionals, and in these today's generations of the composition of my national economy, do not treat banking or insurance as an industry. They as a services, but they do treat them as an industry because considering the capital investment and the product gestation period as well as the shelf life thereof is concerned. But there is every likelihood that there are certain industries or there are certain sectors which may receive the boost henceafter. Because each and every pandemic, even in the past, as far as even in today's era, or as far as this current scenario is concerned, has always resulted into change of working styles, if not lifestyles altogether. There is every likelihood that as least 28, 29 days of the recent past, have taught us to work from home. Probably the entire Service Rules and Shop and Establishment Act kind of regulations may undergo a change. Under such circumstances, entirely a new set of service sector services and products may come into existence, which will have to deliver and assure us of a quantity deliveries. Basically, the many definitions of my economic and service product may undergo a change as they have gone in the past. And most importantly, to conclude, I will say, because I am aware that I am really closing down on my time, but I would like to make two more points as far as the historical lessons for the current crisis are concerned. The first and foremost is that henceforth, probably the logistic will certainly receive the topmost priority as it has been in the past. We have seen in earlier pandemics, when it was not dominated by services sector, the physical infrastructure has always got a boost. And two reasons thereof is that at that point of time, physical infrastructure was treated as one of the best infrastructure to have. In today's era, the physical infrastructure or a boost to physical infrastructure may certainly get one more thing, that basically we would like to know that the educational and social and medical infrastructure may also get a boost. Point number one. Point number two, we will have to see what sort of an impact, as it has said. I wanted to conclude with this particular point. I am happy that Mr. Rangan Hans has already raised this question, what impact it would have on a household savings or a market investment. Certainly, I wanted to conclude this my session with this point. Thank you very much, Mr. Rangan. I hope my answer would satisfy you, that it would certainly have some sort of an impact as far as household savings and thereby resulting into a market investment as well. It is basically because the investable surplus available at the hand of a common man, at least temporarily, I'm hopeful that it is temporary, at least temporarily, will be impacted adversely. I will give you an example to elaborate what I wanted to say. That as of date, more than one occasion, the Prime Minister of our country and the respective chief ministers of the respective state governments have addressed the public at large. And they have appealed time and again that we should not cut down on the salaries to the house help services which we are having. And similarly, they have made the similar appeals to the corporate employer as well. Probably, they are afraid, and rightly so, that this may be an indication. There is every likelihood that as and when the situation normalizes and the baton goes back to the corporates, they may start to restructure their activities, and especially there may be some sort of a reconsideration as far as outsourced employees or the employees who have recently joined that respective organization is concerned. Because one thing we have learned, that if anything is to be done urgently, it is that the administrative costs of our operations have to be reduced, if not to be minimized. Under such circumstances, although in today's era of last 28 to 29 days, we are working from home as a necessity or a compulsion, probably it may be treated as a facility. Under such circumstances, the composition of a salary or income which I am getting may undergo a change. I am not saying that salary will get reduced. It may, but the composition may certainly undergo a change, which gives you a limited or comparatively lesser than your earlier the income at your hand. Point number one. Point number two, the younger generation which is more used, and especially after demonetization drive, we are trying to move our economy more and more towards a cashless transaction. But in last 28, 29 days, when milk vendors, the vegetable vendors, the fruit vendors were coming to your society premises, very rarely they have accepted your Google Pay or they have accepted your Bhim Pay. Under such circumstances, whichever age or generation you belong to, now your wallet has to carry some cash along with your credit cards. And under such circumstances, if my income on one hand is going to be a bit reduced as far as my take-home pay is concerned, if certain portion is taken to a cash reserve thereof rather than a plastic money, under such circumstances, my investable surplus would have a temporary adverse impact. Point number one. Point number two, not only the income would have the adverse impact, my expectation or a consideration from my investment may also undergo a change. what I feel is that, most importantly, a common man who contributes more would be much more interested in a SIP kind of a scenario rather than a medium or a long-term investment at this juncture. That would always have a strain as far as the liquidity in my market is concerned. Point number one. Point number two, the basic employment providers of my economy is that the massive unemployment situation may turn out to be the case, especially because I am afraid that even otherwise automobile industry, a sector of our economy, is not in such a good shape even before the outburst of a corona. And whatever necessary production, necessary demand may be put forward or may be delayed would be biggest impact on automobile, point number one, two-wheeler as well as four-wheeler, aviation, which has seen certain investment and employment, tourism and travel, under such and real estate to a great extent. Under such circumstances, employment may not see a positive picture or a feature as far as these things are concerned. And Parimal sir has raised a question, what are the prospects of disinvestment as proposed by the central government for 2021 financial year? Even otherwise, they were very ambitious, to put it mildly. We initiated the disinvestment process way back in 1992. So for last 27 to 28 years, we have the process of disinvestment, point number one. Point number two, out of these 25 plus minus years of disinvestment, our history showed that only in 3 occasions we have achieved or exceeded that target. And in today's circumstances, government would face some problem as far as disinvestment is concerned. But it is not a phenomena only related to corona. Government after government is trying to privatize or disinvest Air India. This process is on for almost more than 9 years. As of date, not even a single share has been sold. IRCTC has a very good impact, but LIC disinvestment was pronounced in this particular budget, but the corporate structure thereof itself would undergo a tremendous change. I am quite hopeful that at least as a book cover, government may initiate a disinvestment process, but in a later part, or to be honest, a last quarter of a financial year 2021, and besides or even before the LIC, the pattern which IRCTC and LIC is having, that they have a simile, that if you look at it, IRCTC is from services, LIC is also from services, but most importantly, their service product for which demand is age neutral, their demand is gender neutral, their product is more driven by the system. Most importantly, it doesn't have any proportion on iota as far as the possibility of non-performing assets are concerned. These features which are imbibed and embodied in the nature of that particular company may become a candidate. I will not venture at this juncture to name such companies, but certainly that list is readily available in my mind. And I feel that government would try to have some sort of a disinvestment, but not at least in first 2 or 3 quarters of a current financial year 2021, but it would be reserved to the last quarter of a 2021. If they are not able to come to the market as such, they may like to have some sort of SUV or SPV purpose kind of a scenario. And as we say in Marathi, tatatla watitla tatat, that kind of a scenario of a disinvestment may happen. We were having a sooty kind of adjustment arrangement earlier when UTI divested its stake in L&T, Axis Bank and ITC. That kind of a scenario would have. And if the COVID situation worsens, can stock markets be closed? To be honest, as far as this question is concerned, it is completely legal and administrative in nature. As a law, that can certainly be closed. But to be honest, it is more a sentimental issue than a performance issue. We showed to the government and world after 1992 bomb blasts that immediately on the second day our markets were open. That sent a very good signal. But when in America those twin towers were crashed, American stock market was closed for 8 years, and we were able to sanguine and claim from the rooftops the success and stability of our market. And basically, it is more a matter of perception than a performance. And to be honest, even in today's era, the stock markets can work from home or from their disaster recovery sites. As such, not because I have some sort of affinity as far as the stock markets are concerned, but to be honest, closure of a stock market is not an issue as far as COVID-19 situation is concerned. Can we detect any trading patterns that can provide the pandemic is being caused by a man-made virus and that is not natural? Mr. Thapa, I would like to refrain myself for answering this particular question considering the current social media restrictions imposed thereon. It is too early to comment on such a thing. I do have certain conceived or preconceived notions about it that may go in the same vein where your question is hinting at. But to be honest, I would like to refrain myself not to break any law kind of a scenario. But as a person from market, I feel it is too early to make such a comment. It can't be ruled out that it can't be ruled out that it may be a man-made scenario, but now it is more a postmortem thereof. With these words, I would like to conclude my session. But before that, I would like to mention two things. Point number one, that I am really thankful to MIT School of Government as well as Parimal sir and his entire team for providing me this opportunity. And point number two, many suggestions have been raised over here. My humble request would be, this is not a commercial break, but in order to give a reply to your question, I will request you to subscribe and join my personal YouTube channel, because I have uploaded many videos thereon which do deal with economics after a COVID-19 situation. With these words, while thanking all of you for participating in this area, as well as thanking MIT and the entire team of MIT, I conclude this session with thanking you. I hope that you would have been happy or at least satisfied as far as this session is concerned. Feel free to pass on your comments, feedback over here. So if needed, and if you think so, we will be able to conduct another session on this topic. Thank you. Thank you very much.